Tonight, Edward Meyer takes us down a Mississippi Delta trail in search of the blues. I'm Richard.
And I'm Gary, and these are our incredible stories. Hello and welcome back to all of our listeners from around the world and across the United States. We are so happy to have you back with us again for some more incredible stories. If you are joining us for the first time, pull up a chair, join us at the table. Yeah, I think you're going to be very entertained. If you like what you hear, why don't you go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Once you do, you will be treated every Friday to new episodes of Richard and Gary's Incredible Stories, and I can guarantee you, you will not be disappointed.
That's for sure. And Gary, we're truly fortunate to have Edward Meyer back with us. If you recall, he back in November, he brought us some fascinating stories of behind the scenes with Ripley's Entertainment and Ripley's Believe It or Not. And now we're going to totally shift gears here in 2023 and talk a little bit about the blues. That's a style of music that you enjoy also, isn't it, Gary?
I do. From time to time. I have a wide variety of music that I like to listen to, and that's definitely one of them.
And Edward, of course, has written a book about the blues. And we were talking when we were doing the Ripley's podcast with him, we were talking about his book, Buying the Bazaar. And this book is called A Man and the Blues, A Love Story. A Man and the Blues, A Love Story. So Edward is a good friend. He's an expert on the blues, the author of A Man of the Blues. So welcome back, Edward.
Well, it's so great to be back in the new year here. And, I can't wait to talk about another love of mine. We've covered Ripley's pretty well, but there was always a private side of me that some people knew about and some didn't. But for even longer than the 40 years I spent at Ripley's, for 50 plus years now, I've been collecting all things blues for my own collection, not for the company.
Mm-hmm. And, this evening I might focus in strictly on some of the stories you tell connected with Mississippi, because I have a close connection with Mississippi. I did graduate work there at the University of Southern Mississippi in Hattiesburg, and during that time I worked for the local radio station, WBKH, as a disc jockey, and they had a country music format, and so, oh my gosh, one of the favorite artists that I would play over and over again was Country Charlie Pride. And
well, I don't know a whole lot about Hattiesburg, but I'm gonna guess that you might not know this. A band that recorded in the very early 30s called Roosevelt Graves wrote and performed just a couple songs, recorded on 78th, obviously, from Hattiesburg, what is believed to be the very first rock and roll song. It has all of the ingredients that are associated, the beat, the rhythm, the bass pattern of early rock and roll out of Hattiesburg, Mississippi.
Oh, how about that?
Oh, I'm sure that there's a lot of folks in Hattiesburg that don't even know that.
Well, there's a thing called the Blues Trail that runs through Mississippi, and it actually starts in Memphis and is expanded a little bit into Florida and Louisiana, it seems, too. But basically, it is areas of Mississippi marked by historic plaques of things that happened in these little small places related to the blues. And I've done 2 different pilgrimages and maybe parts of a third through the state, visiting as many of these Blues Trail markers as I can. And Hattiesburg was a place that I visited in 2009 and learned a little bit about early rock and roll there. But it's not a place that's, heavy blues. It's, as you said, it's more in the country field, that part of Mississippi. But I love all things Mississippi.
Oh, me too. And that's where I first learned all about seafood gumbo. And so I'm definitely a Mississippian at heart.
It's where my wife and I first ate grits.
Oh.
We living in Florida for a while and stayed away from them. Had no interest, didn't like the looks of them. But the very first time we ever had them was in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and shrimp and grits is now a family favorite.
There you go.
There you go.
There you go. Roll on, Mississippi.
It's kind of a sidebar here, but Mississippi's got some great restaurants, great food. I didn't know it before I went there, and I hazard to say people don't realize it, but Louisiana's not too far away, so it's not. It shouldn't be a surprise, but there is some great seafood in Mississippi.
Yeah. In fact, Hattiesburg is, I think, about 100 miles out of New Orleans, and you are well aware of the incredible eating opportunities there in New Orleans.
The shrimp comes straight up the Gulf from there.
Mm-hmm. So as we talk about the Mississippi Delta Trail this evening, perhaps the best place to start would be to talk a little bit about our favorite blues man, and then we'll get to your favorite blues man. But Gary has known about this musician for quite some time, did some research reports, I guess, was it in high school or college?
High school.
High school. And his name was Robert Johnson. Are you familiar with Robert Johnson?
Robert Johnson definitely is probably the most written about bluesmen. The founder of so-called Mississippi Delta Blues. Recorded only 29 songs in 2 years, 36 and 37. A whole lot of mystery about his life. There are scholars out there that all they do is look for Robert Johnson information. And, when I first started listening to blues in 1970, there was one album of Robert Johnson that had come out in the early 60s. And it became, the gospel, the Bible of Mississippi blues. And over time, people have discovered that, he definitely was an amazing writer, singer, guitarist, but, wasn't really quite as original as everybody had originally given him credit for. As you dig deeper into it, you discover a guy named Charlie Patton and another guy named Son House that were major influences. And others. Robert Johnson was more the epitome rather than the starting point. In 1972, Columbia Records released the remaining Robert Johnson side, so all 29 became available on long-playing discs for the first time, and really created both blues scholarship and the early blues tourism of people wanting to go to Mississippi to find out what this stuff was all about. And, I could talk about Robert Johnson for hours. You can't really describe him in just a couple minutes, but a superlative guitar player, seemingly haunted by personal and maybe spiritual demons, that wrote some of the most moving music ever recorded in America, that becomes the foundation for pop and rock and roll in later years. I mean, he's the cornerstone.
Oh, absolutely.
And the interesting thing is he died very young. He was only 27 when he died, Edward.
Yeah, and then, certainly a big part of my first pilgrimage to Mississippi was to find out about Robert Johnson. I wanted to go to all the places he spent time in, and the big mystery, of course, is where is he buried? Three different cemeteries that got Robert Johnson gravestones, and I think most people agree that the third one is the right one. But again, the whole scholarship built on trying to find where Robert Johnson lived, died, breathed, got married, had a kid, etc., etc.
And I see here in my research, the three sites are the Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church near Morgan City, Mississippi. And then there's, in fact, Columbia Records decided they would put a monument there. And then there's one in the Payne Chapel near Quito, Mississippi. And then there's one in the Little Zion Church north of Greenwood. And I think it was there that Sony Records might have put something. Which of those three?
That's where we believe most people today believe he is actually buried because they found the grave digger.
Mm-hmm.
As with that's how extensive Robert Johnson research is, that somebody's interviewing grave diggers to find out who buried a guy in 1938. It's a long time ago.
A little bit.
Yeah.
But Robert Johnson is definitely the keystone, and Eric Clapton specifically has done a album of his material. Another singer named John Hammond's done a whole album of his material. It never goes old. There must be hundreds of versions of his most famous songs, like Walkin' Blues. I just recently bought an album by a guy named David Bromberg. First song on it, brand new album, 2020, and it's got Walkin' Blues by Robert Johnson on it. And you go, well, it'll never get tired. Mm-hmm. And I probably have a dozen books on my bookshelf about Robert Johnson. I mean, he's just he is the cornerstone.
Yes, and that, by the way, it was the wife of the gravedigger, Rosie Eskridge, and it was in the year 2000 that she indicated that the gravesite was under a big pecan tree in that little Zion Church cemetery. Were you there at that actual pecan tree, or just in the cemetery in general?
No, I've done my pilgrimage. I put guitar picks on the gravesite, and it is decorated with Mardi Gras beads and harmonicas and chains, and they have tourists from as far away as Australia and Japan go to this little church in the middle of nowhere to see that tombstone.
Gary, you wanted to ask Edward about how Robert may have died. Is that right?
Well, I think there's a lot of controversy about how he passed. There's some that say it was because of disease, and then there's others that say he was poisoned, and I kind of lean a little bit more towards the poisoning.
Edward, you have an opinion on that one?
Well, again, when I first got in, started listening to blues in 1969, 1970, there was probably a dozen theories, but I'm pretty sure everyone agrees to this day that it was poisoned whiskey. The juke joint owner's wife, she's flirting with Robert, Robert's flirting with her, but who's ever guilty. But the owner ends up offering Robert whiskey out of the bottle that had been tampered. He cannot finish the show and ends up dying in Greenwood, Mississippi, about maybe a half hour away from where he last performed 3 days later. And in that 3 days, the poison ate through him, and he went, some people say he went mad and he was crawling on the floor like a dog and the whole bit. But the horror, real tragedy of the whole thing is that it happened fairly far from where his family was, and they didn't know until months later. So, he's buried in a pocket grave. Nobody even knows where he's buried. The family has no idea he's dead until, weeks later. That's the mystery starts,
Oh, yeah.
And the single biggest Robert Johnson mystery is supposedly he may have sold his soul to the devil at the Crossroads, one of his famous songs, and there's a movie called that.
Yep.
In order to play well. And so there's a lot of people out there that, think it was a mysterious death, that his time had come, the devil was reclaiming him.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of myths surrounding that. Like when he first started, he was a mediocre guitar player and okay performer, but after he disappeared for a while, he comes back, and now all of a sudden he's phenomenal. He's just beyond what he was in the beginning.
There's a movie, there's a play, there's a graphic comic book even.
Yeah.
People have tackled Robert Johnson for years now from every angle.
Mm-hmm. Well, moving on from Robert Johnson, let's talk a little bit about your favorite blues man, McKinley Morganfield. I don't think anybody's ever heard of McKinley Morganfield, have they, Gary?
Oh, I don't think so, but they probably have heard his stage name.
Yeah, and so...
Yeah, well, more commonly known as Muddy Waters.
There you go.
A student of Robert Johnson, so there's a direct connection. Muddy Waters first recorded for the Library of Congress in 1941. on Stouffville's plantation, a little farm area plantation outside of Clarksdale, Mississippi. And those recordings are available, and they are sensational, fantastic, whatever adjective you want. But a couple years later, Robert Muddy goes to Clarksdale and takes the train north to Chicago. And he is, like Robert Johnson, the foundation of Delta Blues. Muddy is the foundation of what becomes known as Chicago Blues. Electrified the Mississippi Blues, added harmonica, piano, drums, and came up with a very exciting new form of music that was, very, very much based on Mississippi, but at the same time, brand new. And Muddy's best records are 1950s, but he had a fairly long career. Rejuvenated in the mid 1970s with recordings with Johnny Winter, the albino guitarist actually he was born in Leland, Mississippi, but most famous, spent most of his life near Austin, Texas. But Muddy's now been dead since 1983, and I still like to play his records almost every day. And he has two sons, Big Bill Morganfield, and other son goes by the name of Mud Morganfield. His real name's Larry, and they've continued the tradition. And there's probably not a guitar player in Chicago, and maybe in all of America, that hasn't learned something from Muddy Waters.
Oh, so true. So true.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with Edward Meyer this evening, and he's taking us down the Mississippi Delta Trail in search of the blues. And all of this material is coming from a book he wrote called A Man and the Blues, A Love Story. Edward, let's talk now specifically about a couple of the unusual moments you had on the trail. And I've picked out the King Biscuit Show because I'd never heard of it. What's the King Biscuit Show? What did you find out there?
Well, it's a radio show, syndicated now. You can probably find it on your computer, but originally starting in 1941 from the little town of Helena, Arkansas, very close to the Mississippi River, but on the other side. And a gentleman named Sonny Payne has, now deceased, but worked there for his whole career, started a live blues broadcast in 1941 with a harmonica player named Sonny Boy Williamson, number 2, and a guitar player named Robert Jr. Lockwood, who was a student of Robert Johnson, again, that connection. And they did this show continuous every day at 12:15 in the afternoon for years and years and years. It's listed in the Guinness Book of Records as the longest running, continuous running radio show in the world. And as long as Sonny Boy was alive, he appeared live on the show. Did 3 or 4 songs, advertised where he was going to be performing next in the Delta. And it was a Mississippi, Arkansas phenomena. One of the best, widest range listened radio shows, because every day everybody wanted to know what Sonny Boy was up to. And the King Biscuit is the sponsor, is both a cornmeal and a flour company that, sold their product with a picture of Sonny Boy on the cover playing his harmonica. And so, the company was totally separate, but the two become synonymous with each other. And Sonny Payne, I met him in 2009, quite by accident, fluke. Wonderful, wonderful DJ, great guy. I went to Helena, specifically to see Sonny Boy Williamson's studio, where the magic had happened, whatever. It was in a tiny little cafe at a rather late lunch. And there was only one other couple in the cafe, and it had wonderful blues pictures on the walls. And I started talking to the waitress and said, is Sonny Payne still alive? Is he still around? And she sort of joked and said, that's him sitting at the other table. He was the only other customer in the store. So I went over and introduced myself, and he ended up giving us the whole tour of Helena, took us down to the studio, and actually wanted me to be on the show the next day, but I couldn't stay in town long enough, but had a great afternoon with him.
Oh, that's that is one of those amazing moments when something really magic happens. In my
Got
mental
some
math,
nice pictures with them, and it was the highlight of my life.
yeah, of course it is. And
I regret that I didn't go on the show, though.
yeah, yeah.
I changed the schedule for that one.
Mm-hmm. But and my mental math tells me that if that show started in 1941, we're looking at 81 years.
Yeah, I couldn't swear by that whether it is still on today, but it was still on in 2009.
Mm-hmm.
And Sonny Payne, I think, died maybe 5-6 years ago. So I'm not sure, who's carrying it on, if it's still being carried on. But yeah, it was over 70 years.
Gary has some updated information for us.
It looks like they do have a website for it, and it has that claim of being the world's longest running broadcast program, and you can stream it for free from their website.
Okay, so for our listeners who are interested in the King Biscuit Show, tell them where to get it, Gary.
You can go to kingbiscuit.com.
Wow, there you go. So
they actually have a festival in Helena called the King Biscuit Blues Festival every year too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, and they have that posted up there as well.
So great internet exploration. But I bet you, Gary, you're not aware of the fact that Edward, when he was exploring the Mississippi Delta Trail in search of the blues, came across actor Morgan Freeman.
Really?
Yes, he did.
Fascinating.
Yeah. And I think Edward's going to tell us he stayed in Morgan's apartment. Could that be?
That could be. And I'd like to add that it was the same day that I had lunch with Sonny Payne, I had dinner with Morgan Freeman. So it was a pretty darn special.
That sounds like a great day.
Yeah.
More, and I also like the joke that, Morgan Freeman, one of his roles was playing God. So, it was seeing a blues god and a real god in the same day.
There you go.
But Morgan Freeman owns a nightclub called Ground Zero, which is one of the hot spots of Mississippi blues. And it's an old cotton gin, and it has 6 available apartments above the nightclub, one of which is his personal apartment, decorated with his furniture and a couple of his pictures on the wall, etc. And I didn't know that I was booking his room when I booked the room, but I actually managed to get his room. And he joked that, you may be staying there, but you're not going to sleep there. And it is right above the bandstand, so it's not recommended as a place to get a good night's sleep, but it's a cool place to stay. And we checked in and, had every intentions to go to the nightclub that night. And, in between, we're going to go find dinner. And we went to a restaurant called Medidi, which was also partially owned by Morgan at the time. I believe the restaurant no longer exists, but, 5-star, very upscale restaurant on the main street of Clarksdale, Mississippi. And we walked in the door, and at the very first table, there was Morgan sitting there. And I asked the hostess, I said, that's obviously Morgan, but does he eat here all the time? It's like, is this, well, he eats when he's in town, and he's, can I talk to him? She says, well, don't interrupt his dinner, but I'll let him know you're interested. And when he's finished dinner, I'm sure he'll come and talk to you. And sure enough, he did. I was wearing a T-shirt with the picture of Charlie Patton on it, another great Mississippi Delta bluesman. And Morgan and I had a good chat about Charlie Patton. It was a special moment. And I must say, as a restaurant owner, he couldn't have been more congenial. He ended up talking to everybody, signed autographs. He had pictures taken. Once, I had broken the ice, everybody wanted a piece of him.
Oh, wow. That's
Isn't it
pretty
a shame,
cool.
though, when restaurants like that go out of business?
Yeah. Yeah.
As an actor, and he's just got a fabulous voice. I mean, he's just the sound of God.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. No, he has a great voice. There's no doubt about that.
It's definitely recognizable. And Gary and I both love places like that, absolutely connected, with, just unusual places like that, especially if they're old. And one of the stories in your book, A Man in the Blues, you talk about this place in Greenwood, Mississippi. It was an old 1936 hotel restaurant. And, that got my attention right away. I love anything from the 30s and 40s. And here you are in a hotel restaurant from the 1936. And that is where you had not gumbo, but your first tamale.
My first tamales. And, the connection of tamales specifically, but Mexican food in general with Mississippi is all about migrant workers. And again, I didn't really know about this until I went to Mississippi, but it's very prevalent. Every little town's got a Mexican quarter, as it turns out. And I don't know, I can't pronounce the name of the restaurant, but it's something like Gira, Girahdi, something like that. And we checked into a bed and breakfast around the corner, not too far from the main street, and asked the host where was an upscale restaurant. We wanted to, fine dining place, and he recommended it. And we could have walked to it, but we took our car because we hadn't been there before. We didn't know where we were going. And it's not really part of the hotel, but it's in the same building, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that it was a major place for cotton brokers to do business in the 30s. And Greenwood still advertises as being the cotton capital of the world. I doubt it personally, but who am I to argue? But this restaurant has all kinds of little private rooms for businessmen to do cotton deals. And they're closed off, but like where a light switch would be on the wall, there's little buttons. And you press the buttons to get the waiter to come to you. So no one knows you're in the restaurant. It's like totally separated. Rooms are different size according to how many you've got your business meeting with. But a unique experience. Sort of made me think of gangsters. Something shady's going on behind the curtain.
Right.
But we had wonderful, wonderful food. And I had been thinking about tamales since I'd learned that there was tamales to be had. And I was always a little gun shy. How do you eat tamales? And I'm still not sure I know how to do it. But I said, I'm behind the closed curtain. No one's going to see me. I'm going to eat them the way I want to eat them, and I'm going to play with them as necessary. And I've now eaten tamales, all over Mexico, all over California, but I've never had better tamales than I've had in Mississippi.
Of all places.
Of all places. Greenwood, Mississippi. I also had really good ones in Greenville and Clarksdale. There's tamales to be had if you're on the tamale tour.
On the tamale trail. We're on the Trail of the Blues with Edward Meyer, and we're about ready to wrap up this evening, Gary. But we do have to have one last word from Edward. He mentions in his book, which is A Man in the Blues, a love story, he mentions that his road trips, like the fabulous one we've been talking about this podcast, are over. So my question to Edward is, are you sure?
Well, if I may elaborate a little bit here, since I wrote A Man in the Blues, I've written a monstrous 5,000-page index of the blues, not published in print form, but available electronically. And I'm currently writing another blues book, which is going to be a very, very large one, tentatively called My Blues Chronicles. So I'm very busy writing about the blues, but traveling the blues, hope there's some more travel involved, but I've got to be realistic that nothing is on the slate right now.
Well, knowing you, Edward, you're going to be on the trail again down the road. I have no doubt about it. You've had some incredible adventures in your life. We are really honored and privileged to have had you for your stories about Ripley's, as well as the stories that we presented today or this evening about the blues. Thank you so much for being with us. We really, really appreciate you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you, and hopefully I can sell some books with your help.
Okay, I think that hopefully our readers, once again, or not our readers,
Our listeners?
Yeah, our listeners. Let's give that title one more time, Gary. It's A Man in the Blues, a love story. It's by Edward Meyer, and the cover is really interesting. We've got a blues guitar, acoustic guitar there, in front of a cemetery graveyard marker. So that's hard to miss. Thanks again, Edward. And Gary, I guess that wraps us up for this evening. So until the next time, I'm Richard.
And I'm Gary, and this was an incredible story. And thank you again.
Yes. Thanks, Edward.
Thank you.